right, off to Children's Church. I know some of you adults want to go. Hey, we're blessed today to have with us Reggie, Miranda Walling, and their son Lucas. Reggie and Miranda are superintendents of Bud Creek Camp up close to Heber Springs, and you've heard us talk about that camp. Mission builders like to go there and help, and we were there just recently. Mission builders love the food at Bud Creek Camp. Miranda does a great job with that. I don't have any problem getting volunteers when you say we're going to Bud Creek, because they love to go. Their son Lucas surrendered preach nearly a year ago, somewhere around that. And I want to encourage young preachers, and I'm thankful that God is still calling and that young men are still answering the call to preach the gospel and to be pastors of the Lord's churches. And I want this church to be an encourager to that as well, and you have been, and you continue to be so, and I'm thankful for that. So I'm going to let Reggie come and give you a brief report about Bud Creek Camp, and then Lucas is going to come and preach the Word of God this morning. And I know Reggie will be mindful of the time because he's going to be getting in Lucas's time preaching. Many of you will remember Miranda's father, Howard Brewer, big, tall Howard Brewer. He spoke here a few years ago, preached for us one Sunday night. One of the very, very faithful mission builders for a long, long time. Even up in his 80s, we couldn't keep him off of the high parts of the buildings and roofs and those things. A very, very dear friend of mine. A great encourager, a great example to a lot of younger men as well. Brother Reggie, share with us.
Appreciate you, John. All right. Good morning, Sinner. Rising. Well, good to be with you this morning. Thank you for having our family come down, and we kind of got to see. I told some of the guys see how far they have to travel up when they come to see us. So about 2.5 hours. So I enjoy your pastor, Brother Donnie. I've known him over the years, but I've got to have even greater respect for him over the past few years as we took the camp on, and he comes up and heads up the mission builders and brings a group of guys. I know even from this church, I've seen some of them here that come up and make the trip to help us out there. And so I know that you've got a great pastor. I don't know how he does it all, and all that he does, and a long-term pastor is kind of rare in our work. So I have great respect for Brother Donnie and also surviving a building remodel and still here. So that's good. Yeah. But my name's Reggie Walling, superintendent at Bud Creek. My wife, Miranda, also. I call her superintendent as well. She's probably more superintendent than I am. And my son, Lucas, he helps around the camp quite a bit as well. And then we've got I always like to mention Trevor. We've got a younger son. He's moved on up to be with the Lord and was involved in an accident in 2016. And so I just like to think of it this way: we have something to look forward to, and so that's the way I look at it. But it's good to be with you, and church is willing to have us to come and support Lucas in a ministry like this as well. It's good to have pastors like Brother Donnie to do that as well. I just want to say this morning, as far as Bud Creek Camp goes, I try to keep it brief, but I've always heard in seminary when I was going to school, they kept, especially in Greek and Hebrew class, they'd say, if you don't use this, you'll lose it, and it's true because I can tell you firsthand. It's true. I didn't use it like I should, and so I lost a lot of it. And that's the same way it is with our camps. I just encourage our churches to use our camps, and I know that y'all go to Boggs, and I encourage you to continue to take young people, and we need to. It's just a great way to reach out to this generation of young people, to reach them with the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ, to take your kids to camp. And I always liked to, when I was pastoring, to invite kids to come with us in our community, especially kids that our kids knew, and you'd see them at church every now and then. I'd encourage them to bring them along with us and go to camp. And so it was just always a good way to reach out and to these young people. Because when I say use the camp, I believe that God uses camp ministry because at Bug Creek, I know this may be a small number compared to Boggs, but I'm thankful that we were able to see 149 that we know of saved last year at Bug Creek Camp. And so that's just always just an encouragement and a blessing to us to see the Lord using the camp there at Bug Creek to reach these young people in churches that are willing to come and to spend the week with them and to bring them. And so, and I know that the numbers really, I went to a lot of associational meetings this year, and I had people come up to me and say, Brother Reggie, we had this many saved when we got back from camp. And I know that's the way it was even with our church that we're members at there at Cave City, that we had two that we know of right when, two girls when they got back from camp that were saved. So who knows the real number that the camp has, and I know Boggs is the same way. And then also it's just an added blessing to see men surrender to the ministry through our camp as well. God uses it for that purpose a lot of times as well, it seems like. And we had a couple that surrendered to the ministry this year at Bug Creek. Lucas was not one of those that surrendered at Bug Creek this year, but he did surrender to the ministry. And I'm thankful that you're willing to have him come and preach for you this morning and support him in that way. And keep praying for him. I might just say, I always like to say something about the cost of our camp. And sometimes churches just have a lot of money laying around. They can just send our way if they want to, you know. But we do have some expenses always at Bug Creek. We're doing some bathroom remodels, and Brother Donnie and some guys got in on some of that too in the past. We've on our fourth one. We've done 3 so far, and hopefully, Lord willing, we'll get the 4th one finished for summer camp this year. And those are an expense that we're asked churches to help us with. But right now, also in our dormitories, we've got 20-something-year-old AC units, and it seems like everybody likes air conditioning anymore when they come to camp. And so we're trying to raise funds for those as well. And they're running about $3,000 to $4,000 simply because we actually have a man, I don't know if you know Raymond Eisen, but he pastored and done heat and air work, and he's getting them at a cost and also willing to donate his labor as well to help as long as I jump in there with him and help. So I try to do that as well. But I will say that if you want to know more about what's going on at Bug Creek Camp in Greers Ferry, Arkansas, we do have a website, bugcreekcamp.org, and also we have a Facebook page, Bug Creek Camp Facebook page that my wife heads up and does a great job with. I'm not a Facebooker, but she says I'm a stalker because I look over her shoulder on hers. So, but she does a great job with that, putting that stuff out there as well. But just thank you for your time and your attention this morning and your prayers for Bug Creek and your support for my son Lucas as he comes this morning and preaches for you. God bless you.
Thank you, sinners. Good to be with you this morning. I just want to thank you for letting me come. And Brother Donnie, thank you for letting me come as well. This morning we're going to be in the book of Numbers. I know that's everybody's favorite book of the Bible, right? Book of Numbers. And we're going to be in chapter 14, chapter 13, and chapter 14. Is anybody tired this morning? Anybody tired? I didn't figure there was anybody tired either. But no, we're probably all some form of tired, right? Maybe you are physically tired. Maybe you have a job that requires a lot of you physically. Maybe you didn't get a lot of sleep last night. Maybe it was just a job to get everybody here this morning, right? Maybe it was a job physically. Maybe you're tired emotionally. You know what I mean by that? Like, it feels like this day, this month, this lifetime has just been an emotional roller coaster, and you're just done emotionally. Maybe mentally, like you're tired of thinking and processing information. You just want your brain to like shut down and just be done. You just want to get some rest, right? Anybody want to get some rest? We all want rest. We all are desiring and pursuing and trying to find rest in our life. I'll prove it to you, okay? When you wake up of a morning, what's one of the first things you think? Yeah, exactly, right? You're laying there in the covers, the alarm clock shut up, and you think, man, I can't wait to go back to sleep, right? We wake up and we want to go to sleep. We get to work and we want to get off. We get to school and we want to just be done. We're constantly pursuing and wanting rest in our life. And so this morning, that's why I want to show you a few things here from Numbers chapter 14 about rest. More specifically, I want to show you two traps we fall into when it comes to rest, and one truth we need to live in when it comes to rest, okay? But before we read these verses here in Numbers chapter 14, I want to remind you where we are in the Bible, all right? The children of Israel have been enslaved in Egypt, right? God sent 10 supernatural plagues to finally convince Pharaoh to let them go. They get across the Red Sea, and they journey through the wilderness, and they get to the edge of the Promised Land. And they decide to send 12 spies into the land to spy it out and see, how fortified the cities are, see what they're up against. And those 12 spies spend 40 days spying out the land, and they come back, and they give a report to all the people. And that's where we are here in Numbers chapter 13 and 14, okay? So we're going to read starting in verse 31 of chapter 13. It says this, "But the men that went up with him being Caleb, said, We be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, The land through which we have gone to search, it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof. And all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. And all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron. And the whole congregation said unto them, Would God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God we had died in this wilderness? In other words, if only we had died in the land of Egypt. If only we had died out here in this wilderness. And wherefore hath the Lord brought us into this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey? Were it not better for us to just return to Egypt? And they said to one another, Let us make a captain, and let us return into Egypt. And then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of all the congregation of the children of Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, which were of them that searched out the land, rent their clothes. And they spake unto all the company of the children of Israel, saying, The land we passed through to search is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, He will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which floweth with milk and honey. Only rebel not against the Lord, neither fear the people of the land, for they are our bread for us. Their defense is departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Fear them not." This morning, like I said, I want to show you two traps we fall into when it comes to finding rest in our life, and then one truth to live in, okay? The first trap we fall into is this, what I'm going to call our responsibility. So many times we think it's our responsibility, our job to create rest in our life. Look what they said in that first verse we read, verse 31. The 10 spies, they said, we be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. In other words, they said, we can't do this. We can't do this. There's no way we can take the land. Remember where we are in the Bible, okay? They have gotten out of Egypt. God sent 10 supernatural plagues to get them out of Egypt. And then they get to the Red Sea. Did you know before they even get across the Red Sea, they already want to go back? And maybe I had just never paid attention to that or had forgotten that. But they get to the edge of the Red Sea and they kind of throw their hands up like, what are we supposed to do now? Or how are we supposed to get across this? And what does God do? He miraculously parts the Red Sea and they get through. And then in Exodus chapter 15, they get thirsty. And so they find some water with just one problem. It's bitter. So what does God do? He heals the water and quenches their thirst. And they journey on a little ways. And then Exodus chapter 16, they get hungry. And what's God do? He sends manna every day. Every day, because He wanted them to know that their provision every day came from God. That they would wake up in the morning and they would go, this is from God. I eat this to live another day because God provided it for me. And then you get going a little ways further, and in Exodus chapter 16, they get thirsty again. And so what's God do? He tells Moses to split the rock, and water starts flowing from it. And then finally, through a whole lot of other messed up circumstances, so a lot of complaining, and a golden calf, and some other things, they finally get to the edge of the promised land, right? This is like the moment we've all been waiting for. God promised this to Abraham all the way back in the book of Genesis. I will give you this land. I will make you a great nation. And here we are. Here they are. And they throw up their hands and they go, we can't do this. Who do they think got them to that point? Who do they think got them out of Egypt? Who do they think provided for them time and time again in the wilderness? And they get here and they go, we can't do this. Picture this with me, okay? You're an Israelite. Today is the day the 12 spies give their report. You know that. So you wake up in the morning and maybe you go out and you gather your manna for the day, and maybe you eat a little bit of it for breakfast, maybe for lunch, right? You take a sip of the little bit of water you have left from the rock, and you begin to make your way to the middle of the camp where everybody is gathering to hear the 10 spies give their report. And you see the pillar of cloud off in the distance that, I don't even know how to describe it. The Bible just says it was a pillar of cloud. I figure it's probably pretty, something amazing, something to look at, right? And then you keep going and you pass by the tabernacle, this building, this structure that God had so intricately designed for His worship. And you see the smoke rising from the altar, where sacrifices are being burned for your sins. And you keep going a little ways farther, and you see the crowd that is gathering here, and at the front you can see Moses, our fearless leader, right? This is the guy who went on Mount Sinai and he brought back the 10 Commandments and his face shone with the glory of God. This is the guy that stood at the edge of the Red Sea and it parted in front of him. This is Moses. This is our fearless leader. And standing next to him is his brother Aaron, all in his priestly garments. And just, this is the guy that looked Pharaoh in the face and said, let my people go. Right? Because Moses couldn't do it. He had a stutter. He was afraid to do it. And this is the guy this is also the guy that formed the golden calf, though, right? But this is Moses' right-hand man. And then you see the 12 spies. These are the honored and respected men that we chose to spy out the promised land. These are these are the big dogs of the group. And they begin to give their report, and they tell about the land. Oh my goodness, it's really something. You should see it. It's bountiful. It's plentiful. It's like it's flowing with milk and honey. It's so amazing. And you hear one person in the crowd speak up and go, so you think we can take it? And 10 of them just start laughing. No, we're going to die. We're going to die. It's not going to be good. It's not going to be good. No. Right? It kind of makes us laugh to think about everything just in that day they would have walked past. And they go, we can't do this. But yeah, how many times does God walk us past all the things He's done in our life? And He gets us right to the edge of where He wants us to be. And He's like, this is what I've called you to. This is what I've commanded you to. I put you here in this moment so you would give me glory. And we throw our hands up and we go, I can't do this. But here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen, it's not up to us. It's not our responsibility. You see in the book of Hebrews in chapter 4 and verse 9 and 10, it says this. It says, there remains therefore a rest for the people of God. For he who has entered his rest has himself also ceased from his works, as God did from his. If you go home this afternoon and you just rest, what are you going to do? Nothing, right? If you go home and rest, maybe kick back in the lazy boy, but that's it. You're not going to do anything. If you want to find God's rest in your life, you got to stop working. It's not your responsibility. And I'm not saying to go to work tomorrow and quit your job so you can find God's rest or something. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. We got to make a distinction here. The writer of Hebrews, he's not talking about vocation or career or occupation. He's talking about this same work that is mentioned in the book of Ephesians. When it says, for by grace through faith you have been saved, not of works. It's these works of trying to earn God's rest, trying to create God's rest, trying to create something that, trying to create completeness, or really something that only God can create. It's this work of trying to do something that you were never meant to do. It's not your responsibility to do. You see, one Bible commentator, he said this. He said, Christ's rest is not a rest from work, but in work. Not the rest of inactivity, but of the harmonious working of all the faculties and affections of will, heart, imagination, and conscience, because each has found in God the ideal sphere for its satisfaction and development. Now, I know that can be a little bit like, what? So basically, here's what he's saying. He's saying, rest is not getting rid of work. Rest is instead, it is a reunited harmony of all the pieces of your life back to how God originally created them to be. You see, ladies and gentlemen, God created a perfect, peaceful planet. And sin came in and blew that thing to chaos and dysfunction. But when you begin to live in God's rest and accept God's rest, God begins to put all the pieces of our life back together how He originally created them to be. But we can't do that. Only God can put all the pieces back. Only God knows how they all fit together, how they all work together in beautiful harmony. It's not our responsibility. And when we think it's our responsibility, many times here's what happens. We fall into the second trap, which is fear's rebellion. Look in verse 9 of chapter 14. It says this. Joshua and Caleb said this to the people after they wanted to turn back and go to Egypt. In verse 9, they said, only rebel not against the Lord, neither fear the people of the land. You see, I want to show you something. Fear and rebellion are always connected. Almost always connected. Fear leads to rebellion. Because this is what fear does. Fear creates the space for rebellion to enter. Let me put it a different way. My fears make me not want to do stuff. Right? I'm not going to pet a snake. I'm not going to pet a snake because my fear makes me not want to do that. I'm a little bit of a scaredy cat. I'll admit that this morning, okay? I'm a little scared of heights, all right? Well, falling from heights, okay? It's different. It's completely different. I mean, it is, right? But, like, for example, I can fly an airplane. That doesn't bother me. You get me on the roof of my house, that's a different story. Okay, no pun intended. But like my dad, a few months ago, he decided to put a new roof on our house. This has been a little bit, but he decided to put a new roof on our house. We had 20-year-something shingles, right? It was time, and he said, I'm going to put a metal roof on. I think his exact words were, so I don't have to mess with it again in my lifetime. And so he decided we'll do it ourselves. My dad's handy like that. He's put metal roofs on before. And it was all good. I got to stay on the ground for most of it. Okay, my dad was on the roof, and we would hand the metal sheets up, and he would line it at the top, and we would line it at the bottom, and he'd screw it at the top, and we'd screw it at the bottom. You know, it was all good, except for one day. And he comes, and he's like, Lucas, he's on the roof, and he's like, Lucas, come here. And I'm thinking he needs me to hand him something, or something like that. He's like, I need you to get up here. And I said, no. And he was like, I know. And we laughed for a second, and he's like, I just need you to hold a tape measure and a chalk line. You can get down. That's it. And I said, no. And no. But finally, I got up there, and I held the chalk line and the tape measure and got back down, right? It took me a while to get up there and even longer to get back down, but I did it. But the point is still the same. My fear makes me not want to do that. And here's, Satan knows this. The enemy knows this, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why he will always tie your fears to God's plan to trick you into rebellion. Because he knows if he can get you to fear, he has just enough space for rebellion, just enough space for disobedience. What were the people here afraid of? They were afraid of giants. What did the land have? It had giants and big ones. You see, fear is always connected in the Bible to rebellion. We see this in Adam and Eve in the garden. They were afraid God was holding something back. So what did they do? They disobeyed and they ate the fruit. Gideon, he was afraid so many times and that's why he didn't go into battle at first, because he was afraid. Even the nation of Israel with their king. That wasn't the original plan for Israel to have a king. But because they were afraid they were missing out on something, all the other nations had a king. They rebelled and had a king. Even in the New Testament with Peter, how many times did Peter deny Jesus? Because he was afraid if the people knew that he was a Jesus follower, what they do to him. And he rebelled. Fear almost always is connected to rebellion. And you may be thinking, okay, Lucas, I get that. But what about all the times in the Bible when people were afraid, but yet they still followed God? Because that happens. People overcome their fears and they follow God. I think if you look at all those instances, here's what you'll see. You'll see that those people were more faithful than they were fearful. You look at Gideon again. Gideon went into battle, right? Because at the end of the day, he trusted in the Lord. David, so many times in the Psalms, he said, I will not fear because I trust in the Lord. Paul, he writes in the New Testament, I love this. He's like, I'm not scared of death. The only reason I'm here is because you guys still need me. Right? Because he was more faithful to the plans of God. Even Jesus, and I do not want to say, I even hesitate to say Jesus feared because I don't want to undermine his deity. But in the garden, there was that moment, God, if there's another way. But then what did he say? Not my will, but yours. And he went to that cross and he paid for our sin because he was faithful to the plans of God. And this is key in our life. If you look again in the book of Hebrews in chapter 3, verses 7 and 8, it says this. It says, today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion, in the day of trial in the wilderness. Don't harden your hearts like those people did so many years ago at the edge of the promised land. Don't do it. Don't rebel. Don't disobey. Follow God. And then he says in verses 16 and 19, he says, for who having heard rebelled? Indeed, was it not all who came out of Egypt led by Moses? Now with whom was he angry 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose corpses fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who did not obey? And then get this sentence right here of this verse 19. So see that they could not enter because of unbelief. They could not enter because of what? Unbelief. Because that day at the edge of the promised land, they were more fearful than they were faithful. They were more full of fear than they were full of faith. And this is key to us, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to find God's rest and you want to live in God's rest, you have to be more faithful than fearful. You have to be more full of faith than full of fear. And I'm going to say something this morning, and I know how it's going to sound. But maybe, just maybe, you don't feel like you've got God's rest and peace and comfort in your life because you're living more full of fear than full of faith. You see, fear is always connected to rebellion. And we cannot live in God's rest when we are afraid. It's not going to happen. So are you tired this morning? You tired of trying to put all the pieces back together? You tired of being afraid? Here's the truth, okay? We looked at the two traps. Here's the truth. It's God's rest. It's God's rest. Look what Joshua and Caleb said in verse 8 of chapter 14. They said, if the Lord delight in us, then he will bring us into this land, and he will give it to us. Joshua and Caleb, they realized it was God's land. It was God's rest. It was God's promise to give them the land. And they seen it was God's rest. And here's the statement I want you to get this morning. If you get nothing else, get this statement, okay? So I don't know how you got to get it. If you got to write it down, you got to tweet it, you got to send yourself a message by pigeon, get this, okay? Rest is not our responsibility to create. It is God's gift to give. It's not our responsibility to create. It is God's gift to give. You see, Joshua and Caleb, they said, he will bring us into the land. There's no hint of your power or my power in that statement, is there? And he will give it to us. It's a gift. The promised land was a gift to the nation of Israel from God. But how did Joshua and Caleb know that God was going to give them the land? How did they know? How were they so confident that God was going to do this? Because they knew he had already promised it to them. You see, all the way, you remember back in the book of Genesis with Abraham? God promised the people, I promised Abraham, I will make you a great nation and I will give you this land. That's how they knew they could get God's rest, this land, because God had already promised it to them. And maybe you're here this morning and you're like, but how do I actually know God's going to give me His rest? How do I actually know it's going to happen in my life? You can know what's going to happen in your life because God has already promised it to you. Okay? As our musicians come, in Matthew 11, verse 28, it says this. It says, "Come to me." This is Jesus speaking. He says, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." You see, this is what Jesus is saying to us this morning. He's saying, come to me, all you who labor to try and put the pieces back together. Come to me who are trying to create completeness in your life. Come to me, all you who are heavy laden with fear. Come to me, all you who are heavy laden with fear and sin and rebellion and doubt. And come, and I will give you rest. And so I don't know where you're at. Maybe you know you're a saved child of God, right? But you don't feel like you got God's rest in your life. Or maybe for the very first time this morning, you realize that there is a rest for you that is being offered. Here's what you got to do. You got to cease from your works, come full of faith, and receive rest. Cease from your works, quit thinking it's your responsibility. Come full of faith, not fear, and receive God's rest.